Thank you, Sarah, so much for that prayer, because that prayer could not be a better prayer. By the end of Tuesday, I had a nicely worked out sermon for this morning. I had charts for it, slides, and all sorts, and good structure, and all those things. And then on Thursday morning, God sort of blew me away. And it leaves me in sort of two minds. One was, God has shown me something which is extraordinary, and there is nothing I can do today but try and communicate that to everybody. And on the other hand, in retrospect, when you look back on it, it feels so obvious. And there's a bit of me goes, does everybody get this already? And it wasn't. How come it's taken me to Thursday morning to get this? So this morning, my talk is a bit of a mess in that it's got bits of two things in it, and I think they work together. But in one sense, you will be the judge of that. But as Jesus says, don't judge. But Jesus does say assess, think about things, see other people's issues, check yourself. Anyway, so good morning. So I spent 3 or 4 years, maybe more, 5 years, as a sort of church health advisor. So in this area, sort of around the Church of England Diocese of Coventry, which stretches round and about, churches would use the Healthy Church survey that we have done, and we'll look at the outcomes from this evening. And I would arrive in a church and I'd introduce how to get the best out of the survey to them, and I would help them through the process of doing the survey, and I would help them through the process of seeing what they'd said about themselves and the outcomes from the survey. And I'd talk to their leaders and help them understand what God was saying to them through that about their church. And at one point I was talking to a church who, there's one of the statements which is, the Bible is a powerful guide to me in the decisions of everyday life. And one church rated that really quite low, like that wasn't how they looked on life. And I asked one of their leaders, do you read the Bible? Do you read it? And he said, it's on my bedside table. And I said, yeah, but do you read it? And he said, I got to the end. If we get to the end of the Bible and we think it's over, we've made a bit of a mistake. It's not that sort of book. It doesn't finish, well, it does finish with a conclusion, but it doesn't finish with a conclusion like a novel finishes with a conclusion. It finishes with a view of the end that allows us to go back and see the middle and the beginning better. It's written to be read. Yeah, and to be reread, and to be reread, and to be reread, and to read that section and understand it, and to read this section and think, wow, hang on, that's like this, only a little bit different. What can I learn? What's God telling me through the pattern, the repeats, and the variation as we read and read and read? And Matthew, as he's writing his book, expects us to read and to reread and to reread. And Jesus, as he taught his audience with this sermon, this content, he expects us to listen, to remember, to come back to it, to think that bit. Well, the next bit, it's quite like it, but it says, how are they similar? How are they different? How do they build on each other? How do we understand one thing in connection with the next? And often, it's different the way we write stuff in English these days usually. We usually use headings and bullet points and conclusion, and we sort of structure it. The Bible writers didn't write like that. They use things sort of built into the text to do that job of marking when something starts and something finishes, when we should be looking to go back round again. And particularly, often in the section, the start of the section, the end of the section, and the middle of the section are three places where you will find, if you like, the summary, the core of what's wrapped around it and included in it. So this is the Sermon on the Mount, and today I'm going to do like a little sort of summary overview, really, as well as look at our final little bit of it. This is the Sermon on the Mount as the Bible Project understand it and lay it out in terms of structure. So as you look at it on the left-hand side, that green block is like an intro. It's Jesus talking to people. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are. You are salt and light in the world. It's that section, yeah? And then you get into this, well, at the other end, the red bit, you have concluding thoughts, of which my little bit of the passage is included. And then in the middle, you've got 3 blocks of 3 sets of teachings. And my apologies, because I don't think that's too small to read, isn't it, by a long chalk, unless you're right up at the front. But you've got, starts with Jesus' definition of righteousness, talks about, you don't worry about me setting aside the law and the prophets. I've come to fulfill them. Yeah, that section. Bottom left, you have do for others the things that you would desire they do for you. The 3 columns, the first light blue column is about how relating to people, don't look on people as objects to lust after. How do you act when people are bad to you? You're doing well. You're all studying up there as if you can read the text. Your eyesight's much better than I assumed. The middle section is actually really relating to God. So how do we pray right with the Lord's Prayer in the middle of that middle section? And how do we fast right? The bottom of that middle column. And then stuff about trusting God and not relying on earthly wealth, not worrying in that sort of purple column on the right, those sort of 3 blocks of teachings. And I'm tempted to ask this morning, which of those sections, or if you think back to the things that people have said from the front, your own knowledge of this sermon from having read it, which of these 3 chapters of Matthew, which bits of it, are the bits that are most challenging to you? Because I know when I read it and thought about it, there's some of it where I go, whoa, what does he actually mean by that? And that's one form of challenge. And then there's some bits where I read it and I think, I know what he means, but really? Does he really want us to think like that? Surely it's a yes, but sort of moment. But as I said, if you're struggling with things to sort of understand that pearls before swine thing, like that was tricky enough that we didn't really think too hard about it in the sermon because John sort of sidestepped it. So, if you're struggling, like what do those bits mean? Then the way to do it is to go back and look at the beginning and what does it say and work your way through it and notice the end and what it means and go through it again. What might this mean in context? Why does this form a logical step on from the bit before? Yeah? So you're going to have to do it in your own time because we haven't got time to do all of that for everything this morning. I just want to pick out the beginning and the end and the middle. Those 3 points, if you like, in the sermon. Now, again, I apologize, I've made that too small and you cannot read it. But what it says is, this is my summary of that first little package, where Jesus says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. Unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. And when I was thinking about the sermon, in prepping the series, in prepping my bit, I got blown away by the way I'd always read that. I'd always read that as, unless your righteousness score is better than the righteousness score of the scribes and the prophets, then you're not going to enter the kingdom of heaven. And I realized in the prep, in a way I'd never realized before, that I'm utterly convinced that Jesus meant, unless your definition of what it's like to live in right relationship with people is better than their definition, then you're never going to enter the kingdom of the heavens. And it was time of the Euros when I was prepping, and I used this analogy. If life was like a game of football, there's some people say you can do anything you want. The scribes would say, do not commit fouls. And Jesus says, nah, play a beautiful game. There's so much more to life than not fouling. Every moment of every day is an opportunity to see the pass that you can play that no one else spotted. To control the ball better, to live better, to create love and joy and peace and flourishing around you. I mean, if your view on righteousness is how to play football really beautifully, I mean, there is no 100%. There is no pass mark. There's endless opportunity. And that was the first time that working on this sermon, working on Jesus' words here, blew my mind. I hadn't seen that before. And I want to ask you, what is the most impressive experience, something that blew your mind? What is the most impressive experience you've ever had? Right? So we can do the thing. You can cross your arms and just think. Or if you'd like to turn and quietly speak to your neighbor, the most impressive experience I've ever gone through, try and explain what that was like to whoever you're sitting beside. Okay? Go. If one person is speaking to the other, you might want to switch around and other speak to the one. Or if everybody's stopped, I'll stop and move on. Okay, so this is the bit that sort of blew me away on Thursday morning that I want to talk about. So on Thursday morning, there's the Creative Worship Art Cafe, and we were thinking about Jesus and Nicodemus. Jesus meets Nicodemus, yeah? We know that passage pretty well. You're allowed to respond. When I say we know that passage, you're like, yeah? Yeah. Okay, so what we do is we pick a passage, and then I do a little bit of research by trawling the internet, basically, and finding artists or paintings or whatever that have tried to illustrate that passage. And I found this one. This is Jesus talking to Nicodemus, yeah? so-so, it's okay, it's fine. So this one, I mean, it's a bit more abstract-y, clearly more by night, clearly outdoors. Yeah, but it's so-so, it's okay. So this one, that's quite nice, isn't it? That's a picture, it's a nice picture. Two men debating. And then I had this one. And I can't remember the exact sequence of events, but Andy said something which God used to sort of unlock it for me. And occasionally I get this thing where I get a sort of tingling thing that starts at the top of my head, sweeps down through my body, which I believe is God saying to me, notice that. And it gives me great joy when someone else says something, and I get that. And whatever Andy said, I just got hit with this sense of listen to that. And the gist of it was that Jesus and Nicodemus has come to Jesus because he's intrigued. Jesus says, you must be born again. Nicodemus has no clue what Jesus is talking about. And then it's as if a bit of the evening breeze catches Jesus in the face. And he says, you must be born of the Spirit. And the wind blows where it blows, and it affects what it affects. And it's like, it's all around us. And it's not like, he says to Nicodemus, you're a teacher of Israel and you don't know this? And I've always heard that as a telling off. And it's like, I think it's much more like Jesus saying, you're a teacher of Israel and you haven't noticed that the kingdom of God is here? Like, and it's passed you by? It's like this, I don't know, was it easy for you to get the feel of that experience to the other person when you're trying to explain it? It's really quite hard to convey the experience, and I'm struggling because I want to convey the experience, but I know that God gave me that experience. And I'm not God, so I can't give it to you. And I pray that God will just move your hearts and understandings as we think together this morning. But Jesus is sort of going, God's Spirit blows and does it. How can you have missed that? And there's a little bit. It's like the breeze can hit you full in the face. But unless you're tuned to it, unless you're watching for it, it would just sail past you. You just wouldn't notice. And it's absolutely incredible and wonderful and indescribable. How can you not see it? Please, please see it. And at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew says that the crowd were amazed. And the word that's translated amazed or astonished or whatever sort of literally means knocked out of themselves by Jesus' teaching and the authority he taught with. In sort of modern parlance, maybe they were just blown away. But you can still miss it if you're not looking in the right way. I want to go back a few slides because I don't think I've got it on here. No, this will do. That opening section, Jesus says, you got to think about right relationships and righteousness in a bigger, better way than the scribes and the Pharisees, or you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. And I've always heard that until Thursday morning as, I won't let you in. Unless your righteousness is bigger than theirs, I won't let you into the kingdom of heaven. But that's not what he says. What it says, I'll get it right. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Unless you let my words change how you see the whole world, the kingdom of heaven can be all around you, and it'll just wash over you. And you won't enter it because you won't even notice it. If you walk around sizing up others for what they can do for you, you won't see it. If you see others with a critical attitude, you'll never experience life in the kingdom. If you keep fighting your enemies, you'll never get peace. If you refuse to forgive others, you won't experience God's loving forgiveness for you. There's a whole new world God has for us, which Jesus says it exists because I've come to bring it. But we can miss it still. It can just sort of wash over us and pass us by. The last block, beginning, end, and the middle. The last block, one verse. So in everything, do to others what you would desire they do for you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. Now it's noticeable that the words, the law and the prophets, appear only 2 times, really, in this teaching. The beginning and the end. Classic way for a biblical writer or a biblical speaker to signal that was the start, this is the beginning, by repeating the same words. But the new bit is do in everything what you would desire they do to you. And if we look in the middle, which is in the middle of the Lord's Prayer, section in the middle says, your kingdom come, your desire be done. It's the same word. So you've got sort of 3 key words, or little phrases, the law and the prophets, the kingdom. They're both in the start and desire. 2 of them are in the start, 2 of them are in the middle, 2 of them are included in the end. The middle, the start, the middle, and the end. It's like each of those 3 are summaries. The righteousness I want you to live is the desire of your Father. It is doing to others as you would desire they do to you. It is what the kingdom of God is like. It's almost 3 different ways of describing the same thing. So, looked across the middle, beginning and end of that teaching section, and I come to the bit which is actually my passage. So, Jesus' final conclusion, he says this. So then, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them, they will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain came down and the rivers came and the winds blew and they fell upon that house, but it did not fall because its foundation was on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them, they will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came, rivers came, the winds blew, fell on that house, and it fell. And its falling was huge. It's not really a nice turn. Yeah, it's all been good news up to now. And then Jesus delivers this. I don't know whether you think, oh yeah, sure, or whether that comes as a bit of a shock. But it shouldn't really be a shock because it's a recurring pattern throughout the whole of the Bible. You mentioned Isaiah. Isaiah says it in these sorts of words. Look, God's on his way from a long way off, smoking with anger, intense as he comes into view, words streaming from his mouth, searing, indicting words, a torrent of words, a flash flood of words, sweeping everyone into the vortex of his words. He'll shake down the nations in a sieve of destruction, herd them into a dead end. And before that, Moses said it. He said this way, see, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience with him, and then keep his commands and decrees and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you're entering. But if your heart turns away and you're not obedient, if you're drawn away to bow to other gods and worship them, I declare you this day, you'll certainly be destroyed. And way back in Genesis, God says this, now the earth, or the narrator writes this, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for surely the earth is filled with violence because of them, and I'm going to destroy both them and the earth. Then the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. The fact that a flood is coming, and it's going to be dreadful, is not new news. Jesus was very explicit, actually. Sorry, those are the references for those 4 examples. Jesus says this in Luke. He says, just as it was on the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. People eating, drinking, marrying, being given in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark. And then the flood came and took them all out. It really should not surprise us when Jesus says that a flood is coming. You can look at it on the global scale, you can look at it on the national scale, you can look at it on an individual scale. Like a flood that hits the whole world, there'll be a flood that hits each one of us. And right at the beginning, right at the beginning, ignore the slide, right at the beginning, you've got a picture of Adam and Eve in the garden, and all God says is, listen to my wisdom and act on it, and they decide, no, I'm going to grab the ability to tell good and bad from ourselves, we're going to live by our wisdom, we're going to do it our way, and God says then, I told you, you live by your own wisdom, and you die. That's it. There's no escape. Try and live by our own wisdom, by our own stupid choices, and we destroy ourselves and the world around. But listen to the wisdom of the kingdom, of forgiveness and love and generosity of spirit when we look to other people. Join in that, and we find life. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them, they will be like a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. The rains came and the rivers came and the winds blew, fell on the house, and the falling was huge. You've got a picture in your mind what that's like? You have no chance. But Jesus says, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them, they'll be like a man who builds his house upon a rock. Now, it's tempting to think that the thing that matters is the building, the builder. Are you building according to the wisdom that Jesus has just described in the rest of the sermon? Like, will your house be strong enough to stand? Yeah? But that's not what Jesus says. It's not some sort of religious version of the three little pigs and the big bad wolf. It's not like the storm will come and if you've tillered away and built your house out of straw, it's going to blow down, or sticks it's going to blow down, and bricks it's going to stand. That's not what Jesus says. It is not what Jesus says. The difference is what we build the house on. The rain came, the rivers came, the winds blew, they fell on the house. It did not fall because its foundation was on the rock. Nothing that you did apart from decide to go to the rock. Can you see the house? What's doing the work to protect from the waves and the storm? Doesn't much matter what the house is like. It's the rock that's doing the work. Just the same way as in that catastrophe of flood, God said, I'll tell you what, I'll ask you, Noah, to build me a little Eden boat where man and the animals will be at peace and can live in safety. I will see you through the storm, says God. And so Jesus says, the storm is coming. It depends on me. I'm the rock. Trust on me. And you'll be seen through the storm. So, where do you put your trust? That's really the ultimate question here. Jesus says, I'm the only solid foundation, the only way to get through the storm. And if we actually put our trust in Jesus, that means that it won't just be the words we say about what we believe about life beyond death, the ultimate storm that will hit us. But it will mean we trust Jesus' wisdom now in all the little decisions, minute by minute. I was driving in behind a Peugeot 106 this morning, and it had a crash, what do you call those, roll cage inside, and 4-point harness racing seats in it. And I thought, what an idiot. And then I thought, hey, come on. It's a nice, shiny, clean car that he clearly is proud of. And I can be critical about people, or I can be appreciative. Minute by minute, we need to take the decision to say, I will live in the kingdom. I will live by Jesus' wisdom and not my own. And if our lives don't continually move towards this, continually longing to be being filled by the Spirit, as Mike said a couple of weeks ago, but also continually making every effort to ask ourselves, what should I do here to live as Jesus wants me to live? If we're not doing that all the time, then we should really check ourselves. Are we really putting our trust in Jesus? Jesus said, if we don't put our trust in him, it's like building on sand or a rubbish tip or nothing at all, really. It's utterly pointless, utterly calamitous, and deeply sad. A wasted opportunity for life that ultimately, inevitably, ends in destruction and death. So unless you think you're wiser than Jesus, know how to live better than Jesus, then I would invite you to go back and read these 3 chapters of Matthew again. Read it and think, this is how to love others. Read the chapters again and think, this is what the Father desires. Read these chapters again and think, how much does my life look like this? Read these chapters again and think, trusting in Jesus is the only way to avoid disaster. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were blown away by his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority.